Woman, a program by, for, and about women today, with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening, and welcome to Woman. Tonight we have a special one-hour program in order to bring you an interview we filmed with world-renowned essayist and author Simone de Beauvoir. With me tonight, Elizabeth Janeway, one of our most highly acclaimed authors, and Gloria Steinem, journalist, editor, and co-founder of Ms. Magazine. After we see the film, Elizabeth Janeway and Gloria Steinem will share their thoughts on what Simone de Beauvoir has said. And now, the filmed interview.
Take slate 2, take 1.
Throughout her life, Simone de Beauvoir has defied convention. At 17, when other middle-class Parisian girls were strictly controlled at home, she went to the predominantly male Sorbonne to study philosophy. In 1929, at the age of 21, she flouted the prevailing morality by living unwed and openly with Jean-Paul Sartre, the noted existentialist philosopher who has perhaps been the greatest single influence on her life. With him, she took a leading part in leftist political causes in France. In 1969, when the notion was highly controversial, she advocated women's right to abortion on demand. She has been an idol of the feminist movement ever since her book, The Second Sex, was published 25 years ago. At the time, the book was considered to be violently radical, and it sold 22,000 copies the first week. De Beauvoir has had a long career as a controversial playwright, novelist, and essayist. Today, in her late 60s, she's world-renowned. Recently, because she wanted to share her views with American women, she granted permission for WNED to film an interview in her Paris apartment, provided the TV crew was all female. The interviewer is an American friend, Dorothy Tennov, professor of psychology at the University of Bridgeport.
Simone de Beauvoir, what specific events led to your becoming a feminist activist?
Being feminist, I was, in a way, when I wrote The Second Sex, because I began to be very interested in the feminine condition at this time, that is 20 years ago. But then there was no kind of organization of feminine action which really interested me. And I began to be much more active only this last year when I met the liberation movement, the women liberation movement, what we call in French the MLF, the Mouvement de Libération des Femmes. Then I was interested by their way of fighting, and I was interested in them too, and I began to take part to their fight.
What particular issues interested you?
Oh, all the problems of the feminine condition are involved in each other, and the whole thing interested me. But I began with the question of abortion, because in France we are very, very late, very reactionary on this question. And abortion is a terrible problem for the woman. And one woman one day wrote to me, freedom for the woman begins in the womb. And I thought it was very true. And when some young woman came and asked me to sign a manifest saying I had been aborted in past times, and we were 343 to tell it, well, I accepted, and we began a long work about abortion first.
The long walk for abortion occurred on the 22nd of November, 1971, and marked a turning point for both de Beauvoir and the women's movement in France. For her, it signaled a re-entry into active participation in the movement. It looks like being a huge success. It's mobilized many women over a problem of the utmost importance to them, that of abortion. When I think about the present situation regarding abortion in France, which forces the vast majority of women to risk their futures by having secret abortions with bits of parsley or celery stalk at the peril of their lives in the most ghastly conditions, it deserves the strongest protest, and I'm delighted with our protest of today. Because she brought her prestige to the movement, the long walk attracted attention around the world and helped lead to the recent change in French law that permits abortion in the first 10 weeks. 3 members of the French feminist movement who are especially close to Simone de Beauvoir, Michel Vian, Claudine Serre, and Becky Béard, discussed the events of those days.
With some women, we had no idea that it would really become something really important from the French women.
And known all over the world.
And
right?
known all over the world. And the greatest thing also is that from my experience, I can say, is that for the French women, the word abortion was a really taboo word. And starting this manifesto, everybody started talking about it. And as long as Simone de Beauvoir had signed it, the women really felt concerned, and they really felt some kind of new solidarity that they had never felt before.
Did this produce a change in the abortion laws?
The change was elsewhere. It was in the private illegal movement which began to appear in Paris, but in other towns too, in Grenoble, and a woman taking on herself the work of making abortions. A woman, and even some doctors helped too. And it was important for the fact that a woman did that illegally, saying they did it, and the police did not dare to intervene.
Do you work within any organizations?
No, I don't work in organization. I work with some women of the Liberation Movement. Well, on one thing or one other, it was once an abortion. Another thing was a great feast we made at the Mutualité. Another thing could be a march in streets in Paris, or I can help in some little ways for abortions, for instance, by letting my place to the doctors and the patients who come for that. Well, little thing like that. But and then I am in very good terms with some women of the movement. But themselves, they are a little different. They are different, I shall not say sects, but it must be the same thing in the States. They are different groups which don't always agree with each other. So I am very friendly, I am in very friendly terms with some of these groups, but not with all. There are some of them I don't know at all. And I guess there are some of them which don't like me so much neither.
Well, I think they respect her, even if they don't agree with her. They have to respect her, because she's very valuable.
How about women who are not feminists? Do they respect her too?
Maybe some of them, who are not feminists, are kind of still a little afraid of what she did, because it's still very hard for women to live the way Simone de Beauvoir lived.
Elizabeth Gould Davis has written a book that she calls The First Sex, and she's a great admirer of yours. But she wonders whether you really think that women, or you really thought that women were the second sex.
Well, that's a way of speaking. The second sex, it was a little playing with the words, because very often, I don't know if you say that in the States too, you speak of the third sex, meaning the homosexual. So I thought it was amusing to call the woman the second sex, because in fact they are citizens of second class. They are kept down by the men. They are certainly not on the top of the society. So it was playing with the words and saying something which is true in our society today. That's what it
Society
means.
defines us that way, not that we're that way. Before I came here, I spoke to women feminists in the United States. Barbara Love, for example, said that she felt when you wrote The Second Sex that you saw lesbianism as a kind of pathology, and she wonders whether, she's written on this subject, your views about female homosexuality have changed recently.
I have never thought that lesbians were pathological. On the contrary, I told very clearly that homosexuality was a choice for a woman as good as any other one, and that she could put her freedom in this relationship with another woman. I never thought it was pathological.
Such feminists as Kate Millett, Naomi Weinstein, and others have talked about psychotherapy as a tool of oppression against women.
I guess it's true, but it's freedom to say how Freud was used to persuade women that they had to be mothers and to stay home and to play their feminine role. And I am quite of the idea that the psychoanalysis, particularly, has been a way of oppressing women used by men in many cases. I don't say in all cases, but in many cases it has been used to oppress women and to make women stay home, have children and nothing more. And there is Ellen Dutch, for instance, who explained that women were masochists, which is very easy for the man to believe, because so they can be oppressor and a sadist without remorse, since it is said that women are masochists, which I don't think at all. So I agree with Kate Millett and you and all about the bad views of psychotherapy regarding women.
Since she stopped work 3 years ago on her latest book of memoirs, de Beauvoir has become more active in her support of the women's liberation movement. She is president of Choisir, a pro-abortion group in Paris. She's president of the League of Rights of Women, which deals with discrimination against women. She writes about issues concerning women for Le Temps Moderne, a left-wing paper in Paris, often using her writing to encourage other women to write about themselves.
Do you feel that the impassioned, intense, jealous infatuation that you've described in your novels and your memoirs an inevitable part of being a woman?
No, I think there are women who are not jealous, who are not infatuated, who have not all these, how would you say, défauts, the contrary of qualities.
Do you think women can be independent emotionally?
Who can be independent emotionally? I think men too have their emotions, and it's not a bad thing to have emotions and feelings and to care for other people, for instance, or for the situation in the world. Independent, I don't know exactly what you mean by independent emotionally.
Women have such strong traditions of mutual distrust and suspicion and not getting along with each other very well. And we talk about sisterhood in the United States, which I understand in France, a translation has not been found.
It's not possible to say sorority. There is no word to say sisterhood, which is a very beautiful word. But, well, there is sisterhood among a lot of women I know. They are very friendly and they help each other, and they work in sisterhood. But not all of them. Not all of them is a sister with all of them.
What do you think women fear most about feminism?
I don't know if it is fear. They are jealous of the women who are not just the kind of servant and the slaves and objects they are themselves. I guess that is that. They fear to feel a inferiority in regard with the women who work outside and who do as they want and who are free. And maybe they are afraid of the freedom which is made possible for them, because freedom is something very precious, but in a way a little fearful, because you don't know exactly what to do with it. So I guess that's what some women fear.
You think it's basic, then? It's not just a matter of misunderstanding what feminism is?
No, I I guess even if it is not misunderstanding, there is a more basic fear than that, certainly. Most of them don't want to be really free. And they are afraid that men would not be the same with them and would not protect them and help them, what they don't do, in fact, what the women hope they will do.
What do you think men fear most about feminism?
Oh, they fear a lot. They fear to have concurrence in their work outside the home. They fear not to have a servant at home to make all the things which are useful for them. And they feel to lose their feeling of superiority, because it's always very pleasant to feel superior to somebody. So I guess many of them fear all these things together. Most of them, I guess, fear not to have a servant at home. That's the most important thing for them, I guess. They will accept the woman outside to work outside if she does exactly the same kind of work for them and for nothing at home.
How about very recently, since you've become a very active feminist, and since there's a movement, a feminist movement, have men's reactions intensified, become stronger about this?
I guess there is more violence today among the men than there was in my time, because they resent indeed the will of women to liberate themselves. And for most men, sexual freedom, that means so you can sleep with me, you ought to sleep with me. And I know that many of my friends are much more annoyed, I don't know how to say, in the streets than I was, or my sister, or my friend when we were young. The men are much more arrogant, and they follow women and they insult them if the woman will not go with them, more than in past times. That was always something existing in Paris, indeed, and in Italy chiefly. But now it's worse than it was, certainly, and it is certainly from a kind of resentment.
A friend of mine has wondered about prostitution. She thinks that it could be a respectable profession among women if men didn't control it and if the pay were right. What do you think about that?
I hesitate very much. I don't know. Maybe it could. And in any way, it would be the way you say. It would be paid enough and it would not be controlled by men. Then if a woman wanted to do that, after all, they are free to do it. I don't know. I don't feel that it is a very good way of living for a woman anyway. She's too, even in these good conditions, she's too dependent on the desire of men. No, I am not very much for it.
What do you think the greatest obstacles are to feminism?
Well, it is what we said a few minutes before. It is the fear men have and the fear women have. And it's the whole thing that makes feminism difficult.
Do you think that technological changes have made feminism possible now where it may not have been possible before? Washing machines, birth control...
I am not sure that it is really the basic thing for feminism, because you can have a birth control and the washing machine and be an oppressed woman. And you can have no washing machine and no birth control and manage to be your own master.
Wilma Scott Heidi, who is the president of the National Association for Women Now, wondered whether you feel that it is very important to bring out feminine qualities in men that our culture has not permitted to exist, and also what we might call masculine qualities in women.
I don't believe at all that there are natural qualities which are masculine or feminine. Culturally, yes. For instance, women are less, in general way, less aggressive, less violent, less important too, and full of the idea of their dignity and wanting honor and all that. Usually, that's the men who are chiefly like that, competitive and all that. So, if it would be possible to make the men less aggressive, less competitive, less sure of themselves, that would be certainly something good. And if you could help a woman to be more sure of themselves, more trying to rely on themselves and not on other people, not relative to men, but having themselves in their own hands, that would be very good too.
And these are things that men might want themselves too. There could be feminist men, couldn't there? Do you think there will ever be many feminist men?
Many, no, I don't think there are many. But I should say I know some of them who are really feminists, chiefly in the very, very young generation. Men of 20, 25 are more really feminist because they feel the question of age against the older people, the mature people, against adults, more than the discrimination from sex.
You have always been a woman greatly respected in intellectual circles. Do you feel that you have been within those circles discriminated against as a woman?
No, I never felt I was discriminated. Well, I was very astonished when I wrote The Second Sex to see that some of my male friends were very angry at me. For instance, Camus. I believed he was, if not a feminist, he considered that women and men could be equal. And then I discovered him and some others that they had a feeling of superiority and was very angry at a woman saying the things I said in The Second Sex. But before, I never saw in my circle any mark of discrimination since I was intellectually as good as any other.
Do you think that your writings and your work would be different if you were not a woman? And I mean that in the sense of when women step into the domains of thinking that men assume are their own, they have more trouble. There are very few women philosophers, for example.
I cannot think of myself as not being a woman because I cannot think I am not myself. So myself is being a woman, and indeed my books express this situation with mine, situation of being a woman. I don't think they could have been written even by a man. Now, to be a philosopher, that I spoke about that in my memoir and too in The Second Sex. It seems to me that it is very seldom that even a man is a real great important philosopher. So it seems to me natural not to be a philosopher. And what seems to me a little unnatural, strange, exceptional, is to be one. But that was never the thing I wished to be. When I was young, I always wished to be a writer, and chiefly to write novels. But not to be like Kant or something like that.
You have repudiated religion through your life. Have you found and felt a need for a substitute?
No, I mean, human activity on this earth seems to me quite sufficient to live.
De Beauvoir has said that the idea of death held terror for her from the first moment she realized that she someday must die. Later, as she observed the aging process in herself and her friends, she decided to face the problem head-on. She wrote Coming of Age, a large work about old age, and because of its success, the publisher now issues a regular periodical devoted to practical advice for older people.
In your book, The Coming of Age, you talked about what some people have said was a taboo subject, old age.
Yes.
And you talked about the physical deterioration, but also about the indifference and the injustice of society.
Yes.
Would you like to give us some feelings that you have of specific recommendations that you feel would help?
But my idea is that you can do nothing for elderly people if you have not begun to do something for the people from the youth into old age. The drama of most old people, old workers chiefly, is that they have been very, how do you say, worn out. They have worked too much in too bad conditions, and when they are 60, 65 and they come to retreat, They are very, very old, much older than people who have not worked all their life. And not only they are very old in their body, but they have not the possibility of reading, of interest in themselves. They have no culture, usually, most of them. And so they don't know what to do with the last years of their life, when they have a little time to do something, but they don't feel like doing anything, most of them. It's not so bad maybe in the country that in the town, but in the town and chiefly for the working class, it's a terrible drama all day, chiefly for the men, because the women can always do little things at home and they feel themselves useful, while a man, if he's taken away from his work, and he has really nothing to do and he feels himself no longer a man. It's a very, very terrible thing.
How do you feel that medical professions function to increase or decrease the problems of old age?
Well, in a way, it increases the problem because it helps a lot of people to come to a relatively old age. There are no death in the first years of life as it was in past times. I mean, in our society, in our relatively rich society. And then there are much more older people than there were before. But I don't think that medicine makes really much for the low-class people. They help chiefly rich people to keep a body in sane conditions, but not the poor, because it's very costly to take care of one's health, and old people cannot really do that.
We've had a lot of difficulty in our society, in the United States, and here too, on the issue of death. And this is one that you have raised in your writings, in The Coming of Age, and so magnificently in A Very Easy Death, the story of your mother's dying.
Yes.
What feeling do you have about that? Do you separate it from your feelings about old age?
Yes, this is something different, since it can happen to young people too. And then it is peculiarly horrible when you have young people taken away without having had their lives. But there too, there is a social difference, so I say that in A Very Easy Death. I see my mother had not an easy death, in fact, but she was with her children, she was in good conditions. She did not feel herself die. She did not know she died, in fact. But poor people, when they are in hospital, when they are very, very badly treated, because there are not enough nurses. Nurses are not bad, but they have too much work to do. And the doctors too, and so they are very lonely, and they know they are going to die, and they have a terrible anguish. And I feel anguish is something more terrible than death itself. If I could have a wish, I should wish to die without anguish.
Without knowing?
I don't know, without knowing, maybe knowing, but not with this terrible anguish that very many people have when they feel they are going to die, and they feel so lonely.
Yes, many people feel that they would prefer to know, but the horrible thing that happens, which I think you depicted so well in the book, is the isolation that comes because of everyone's fears.
Yes, because there are lies between people even between people who usually tell everything to each other. If one lies to the other because he knows he's going to die, for instance, and the other does not know, that's a terrible thing.
It puts you out of contact with everybody.
Yes.
Have you begun to feel your own influence on other women?
Well, a lot of them tell me I had influence. I hope it's true, and it pleases me very much when I feel it's real. Certainly. Yes, I think I had influence in so much that they wanted somebody to have this influence on them. I don't think a book changes the life of another person, except if she is waiting in a way for this book.
Which of your works are your favorites now?
It's difficult to say. Everybody tells me that the second sex was important for women, so I like it. But personally, I care maybe more for my books of souvenirs.
The memoirs.
Oui, les mémoires. Because after all, the second sex, in a way, could have been written by another woman. And in fact, a lot of women now write on the question and very near the way I wrote myself. But my memoirs, that I alone could write them the way I did.
Have you, however, read any of the recent feminist writers and gotten any new, obtained any new concepts from them at all?
Yes, I read a lot of feminist books, Kate Millett and Slavik Firestone and many other American books chiefly, but then too a very good English book by Juliette Michel, Woman Estate, and well, I read many books and some articles rather written by French women too. Well, there was a very important thing I discovered. That was the importance of the economic situation of the woman as working as inside the house, what they call the hidden work. And I did not know how milliards of hours of this work there is in France and in the States too, and how it is important for the masculine society to have women doing this work for nothing, not being paid for that. And I discovered that all the laws about abortion and all that was in connection with this exploitation of women at home. And I guess that is a very important thing. And now a lot of women begin to take conscience of that.
Were there any women that were important figures in your life, in your earlier life, intellectually?
Well, I had my friend Zaza. I spoke of her in my first book of souvenirs. But then she died very young, and I had good comrades and friends, or I had younger girls for whom I felt very much affection, and I had my sister, but I cannot say that either of them had an intellectual importance in my life. In fact, there is just one person, it happens to be a man, but it is Sartre. I just lived in a kind of symbiose intellectually with Sartre, because we spoke to each other from morning to night, and we made our ideas together on a lot of points.
Although there have been other men in her life, none has meant the same thing to her as existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, with whom she has completely shared her life and work. Today he's ill and nearly blind, but she reads to him daily and takes him to his favorite cafe. She watches over his health and privacy, much like a loving wife.
How do you think Jean-Paul Sartre's work would have been different had he not been influenced by you?
We have not been influenced by each other about, how should I say, the inspiration, the creation, the creative part of our work. But we have helped each other by, how do we say, criticizing each other very much. I mean, when I wrote something, Sartre read it and gave me advice. And when he wrote something, I read what he had written and gave him advice. But the first idea, the conception, the creative work was always done by each of us alone. It was only after it was done that we could help each other.
And then it might have been changed because of what you would say to each other about it.
Oh, yes. Very often I heard his advice and changed what I had written, and he heard my advice and changed what he has written. It was quite reciprocal.
Would you be willing to tell us how you feel about monogamy?
Oh, that's up to each person. If somebody feels to be monogam, let him, let her be. I don't feel nothing peculiar. It seems indeed a little difficult that one person should have a relationship with only one person in his or her life, but it can happen, and some people are really happy just with one man or one woman in their whole life. But if somebody wants to have different relationships, I guess she must have them.
Who thought marriage for women was dangerous.
Oh, yes, I always think that.
What could change it so that it would not be dangerous for women?
It would disappear. In my eyes, that would be the best thing. That people manage a way of getting children and having these children happy, but without being married and without what we call the nuclear family, which is very bad for the woman and very bad for the children too. And that is a thing Shulamit Firestone said very well. That is what I like very much in her book.
Shulamit Firestone.
Yes.
She talked too about the liberation of children.
Yes.
What does that mean to you? Do you think that that's connected with feminism?
Yes, certainly, because liberating the children, it's liberating to the women, the mothers, and then it is liberating the little girls for their future life, not being mother as their mother had been. I guess that's very important. It's very important to give the children responsibility very, very young in the whole society, and not to be just involved in the family. I heard, I am not sure it's quite true, but I heard that in China, very, very little children are useful for doing little work in manufacture and all that, and they earn a little money, and they have the conscience of being not just the child of the parents, but a little member of a big collectivity. And I guess that's very important.
In other words, they're able to contribute to the society at an early age, whereas
yes,
in our...
they don't feel they are just the thing of their parents. They are not an object. The women are treated as objects, but the children too. And if it can be changed, that would be a very, very good thing, and certainly for all the women too.
How do you feel about the problem of overpopulation? Do you think that that has something to do with the rise of feminism now?
In a way, yes, because I guess women don't feel now it is such a duty to have children, though they still are told that it is so. From the youngest years, a girl is said she has to be a mother, if not she will not be a woman. But when they grow up, some of them, maybe many of them, begin to feel that population is not a problem, that there is too much population so that the earth does not need to have more and more and more children on it. So it can help the mentality of the woman.
Do you think that if we had a changed society, that men would enjoy being parents more?
It's possible. I tell you, it's very difficult to speak of the future. I always fear to say nonsense when I speak of... But what seems to me is that, again, the young generation, many of the young men take care of the children much more than before. And now you can see that, and you see a lot of young fathers with the children on the shoulders and all that. Certainly, that's part of their feminism. That's to the relationship to the children. In some couples, indeed, not in many, but among the hippie, for instance, that can happen.
What are some of the more significant events that are occurring in technology, in science, in social conditions? Are there some that worry you in terms of what may come in the future out of them?
I don't know for the future. I know for the present there are a lot of things which are frightening. What happens in Chile, what happens in Greece, what happens all over the world. That seems to me something very frightening. What seems important to me, maybe the most important thing, is the progress, the effort of people who were not free before to become free. But it's a long way and it's very difficult. I mean, Africa, for instance, or Asia, all these countries which begin just now in Africa to be their own masters. But it is very difficult in the condition where they live to make the necessary progress to have all the people living happily. That seems to be important and very difficult. And what is frightening? Well, it is the whole of the strengths which go against this liberation of the people. All these fascists, quasi-fascists, or wholly fascists who are trying to crush all freedom all over the world.
What is your life like now?
It did not change since my last book. In France, it is tout compte fait. And they translated that in English by All Said and Done. Yes, and that is the story of the 10 last years of my life. And it is not very different from the others.
Do you have plans for future work now?
Well, I have some plans, but that's not something you can explain because it's not yet really put in words, so I cannot speak about it.
What are the things that give you the greatest pleasure?
Greatest? Well, when everything goes well, I like to write, but sometimes it's difficult, and sometimes I don't know exactly what to write, but that is one thing I care very much for. Then seeing my friends, speaking with them is something very important. Then I should say traveling. I always love very much to travel. And then reading, I still love very much books. And there are a lot of other things, but these are the principal ones.
Elizabeth, when did you first know of Simone de Beauvoir?
I've been trying to think. I've been racking my brains. I think it must have been in the late 40s, soon after the war. I reviewed both the Mandarins in the first volume of the memoirs, Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter. And, of course, I've read everything she ever wrote ever since. It was wonderful to see her looking, you know, not the same, but the same person, so to speak. There's a bit in the book on old age where she speaks of Goya, and of a self-portrait that he did in his 80s of an old man with a great Faust of white beard leaning on 2 sticks, and underneath something that said, "I am still learning."
I have a feeling she would go along with that, yes. Gloria, did she have any kind of special impact on you when you first read her?
It's interesting to me now in retrospect that I managed to read all of The Second Sex and connect with it emotionally but not personally. She seemed to me to be such a very special person that if one did not have those kinds of intellectual credentials, then one couldn't aspire to that different kind of life. Now, I suspect that was a measure of me more than of her at that point, not to have really connected with what she was saying. But it wasn't until much later in my life. I mean, my first reading of her was in the late 50s, just as I was graduating from college. And only in the mid-60s, as I had finally begun to come myself to some similar realizations, did she really have an impact. And then, of course, enormous, huge impact. You know, I couldn't understand why I hadn't perceived it in the first place. And in I think it was in 71 that the French women signed the abortion petition to which she refers in the film. That also had a great impact on all of us in this country, and we did ourselves do a very similar petition in the first issue of Ms. Magazine, which was 72, in the preview issue, I think. And sent it to all the state legislatures and so on. So, I mean, you know, there began to be a very close kind of relationship and a real feeling of learning and looking to her as an example.
Have you both met her?
I've heard her lecture when she was here, but I met her just that way, but never really to talk to. That was a very brief encounter. It was, you know, a literary lecture.
Gloria, you have met her then?
Yes, when I was in Paris about 3 years ago, I believe, I went to her apartment with a friend, with several friends, in fact, and we did talk for a while, and it took me a while to get over the feeling that I was speaking with the legend, you know. I remember especially that we talked a good deal about the issue of housework, because as both a socialist, a Marxist, and also a woman who had not herself been a housewife, she was just beginning to come to grips with the fact that housework was indeed work, even though it was not salaried, and how housewives as workers could be organized, should they be paid, should they not, and so on. And she had great misgivings about the prospect of organizing across class lines, and was asking me why it had been successful to some degree in the United States, and I couldn't get through. I kept trying to explain why it was, and finally I quoted an actress who said in the magazine that she had been married to one fascist and one Marxist, and neither one took the garbage out. And suddenly we understood each other. There was kind of a laughter of recognition as, she said, well, yes, patriarchy is, underlies all of these things.
I want to get your reactions to some of the things she said in the film. And at one point she was asked what women fear most about feminism. And do you recall her answer?
Yes, I do. And she spoke of the women who feared feminism as being not only fearful but jealous of women who were in the life outside, who were free, I think she said. And I think really there's a little more to it than that. No doubt, the using not her own language may have kept her from saying everything she meant to, but it seems to me that there's also an element there in which a woman who has accepted the feminine role, the traditional feminine role, has been socialized into it, is really very much afraid of being suddenly bereft of this, of being bereft of the protection of men and having to go and learn to do something that she's never been trained to do. That can be legitimately frightening, you might say, and it emphasizes I suppose, what feminists are often attacked for saying, that it's a good thing to have a job. Well, there are some terrible jobs. I think what's good, what we mean when we say something like that, is that it's good to know you can look after yourself, that you can, if need be, stand up, be independent, and be sure that you aren't, going to be left alone on a windy street corner some night.
How did you feel when she said that she had not been discriminated against? I had a little trouble with that.
Mm-hmm. I could hear myself saying it in years past. No, I'm not discriminated against. At the very time when I, was getting very odd assignments because I was a woman or not paid equally.
I think we all have had to come to the realization, those of us who have been less conscious of being discriminated against, that there is in our society a built-in discrimination, and that if you do reject that traditional feminine role, very often we fall over and assume that we have to take on the macho role and go and be, if you don't want to be a woman, you have to be a man. Mm-hmm. And there ought to be much wider range, indeed, of course there is a much wider range of ways to behave, ways to look at the world, and choices between those two extremes.
I was a little surprised when I heard her say that she was not a philosopher. Now, I know she's a novelist, but I also think of her as a philosopher, and I was surprised that she didn't think of herself in that way. Did that strike you?
I wonder if that's her intellectual training is so rigorous that she falls back from considering herself to be a full-fledged philosopher, though certainly she has had more impact on the lives of people and been the cause of more change than many people she herself might consider intellectually more able and therefore a philosopher.
I think it may be related to what I was saying about the choice unconsciously of one's image of the other role. Perhaps if there had been in France in her time a sense in which one could be as serious and write about matters of as great moment as a novelist, she would have been, which I wish she had because I love her fiction, been a little more willing to think of herself as a novelist.
Gloria, you said earlier that about her involvement with socialism. Do you have a feeling that she's changed her mind about that totally?
Well, she has said that at the end of her book, The Second Sex, she did not consider herself a feminist, and specifically said she was not, because she defined feminism as the organizing of women, or a belief in the need to organize women separately from the class struggle, or in addition to the class struggle, which she did not then believe. More recently, in 1972, she did an interview with a German journalist, which we published in the magazine, and she said that she had become a feminist, that she had come to the conclusion that at least for an interim period, in effect, one had to organize separately as women in order to gain very important rights, abortion, equal, all the things we know about, because she had learned from experience that it simply did not happen automatically, even within groups that were theoretically devoted to equality. And I think that's a very big change. It's interesting, though, that in a way it was always there, that view, because she was the first, in my knowledge anyway, to define women as a caste, which by definition is deeper than class. That is, you know, it's a physical mark of sex, or of race for that matter, that one cannot change, whereas class, for all of its humiliation and, you know, imprisonment, one can perhaps change. So it was really a tactical question, I think, in a way. She's come to the realization that from a tactical point of view, one needs to organize together as women, and that realization and her subsequent, you know, marching with women and, you know, really identifying with women is what caused me as a person, anyway, to identify with her emotionally, when before I had really, it had been more intellectual.
My impression from talking with her was that she is really enjoying this recent association with other women, the young women of the MLF. She's having a terrific time with them.
I think so, because even if she was not, I mean, she was a very privileged person in the sense of education and so on, and she does not see herself as having been discriminated against in her profession, but at a minimum she was deprived of the company of other women, because she was always the only woman in a group of male intellectuals, and now for the first time she, it seems anyway, for almost the first time, you know, that she has women as a group, her intellectual equals from whom she learns and whom she teaches, to support her, and it does seem to have brought her to life in a way.
One of the other things that interested me in my own reaction to the film and to what she was saying was how much we've all changed, how much she's changed, and how far we have come, I think. Did you get that feeling?
Yes, and something else too. I don't know how to express it except to say that she is a whole person. Someone said to me that when women are together as a group, and we, even as feminists, feel something is missing sometimes, you know, that it's somehow a devalued group because men are not present, that what we are really missing is the rest of ourselves. You know, all of the qualities that we have not...
and you don't have that feeling.
And you
about
don't
her.
have that feeling at all. She is a whole person.
She has a kind of, you can see almost why, when she was asked about fear of death, and she said, no, this world is enough for me, something like that. You could see that, and that she was, I think all of that comes out of enjoyment of life, of which depends on the ability really to experience, to feel deeply, to have everything come in on you, so to speak, and to be there. And this, I think, is part
yes, she wasn't in the
wholeness.
least passive. That was a great key to it, because if faced with the question of why women are frequently against feminism, I myself often say, well, it's because it's really not understood. I mean, it's seen as its public image, and if it were really understood, it would be. She had none of that. She just went right to the heart of the conflict and said, well, even when it is understood, of course there is still resistance and fear. It was much more she has an ability to face conflict, which I think is hard for a lot of women.
What was your reaction to her saying that the fact that there was hidden housework, as she put it, I think, was surprising to her? This was a shock to her. She hadn't known about that before she had read Shulamith Firestone.
Well, I think that is a function of personal experience. I mean, she has not herself been a housewife, and also a function of holes left in the Marxist philosophy by the notion that housewives are not salaried and therefore they're not workers. that profit is not made from their labors, and so it's a separate question. You can't organize women who are housewives, or alternatively that housewives are considered to be, for functional purposes, the same class as their husbands in terms of organizing, when for the most part they are not. They do not have the same kind of power that the man they are married to has.
Yeah, and a cultural difference too.
Sure,
I think,
it is. I think you're right.
France and here. Perhaps in some ways they take la cuisine more seriously, being a manager of a household, all the careful shopping and so on that's done. She spoke of the old women still having pleasure out of doing things around the house, and men having their lives broken off when they retire.
They could be content to do little things around the house. How did you react to that?
Well, I really don't think, I think that's true also in America, that retirement for men is much harder than it is old age for women who have not worked. But of course, here in America, so many women do work. Half of the married women have jobs right now. And our old women who are alone are in very unfortunate and stringent financial conditions. Half of the widows or single women over 65 have less than $2,000 a year. No Social Security entitlement on their own, except through husbands.
Gloria, can you talk, we have only about a minute, but can you talk a little bit about the differences between our feminist movement and the French women's feminist movement?
Well, I think that in the beginning, there are more samenesses than differences, but it is true that in the beginning, the Mouvement Libération des Femmes, the MLF of which she speaks, was very much more a small intellectual group that had grown out of the left, and therefore, not at all a mass movement, not a populist movement, a very small intellectual group. And it was abortion as an issue which reached out beyond those small groups and turned the movement into a more populist group. Choisir, of which de Beauvoir is president, is the most important group in that struggle, and she really lent herself to that successful effort to make a more populist movement and to not be content with being restricted to very particular intellectual circles.
I thank you both for sharing your thoughts with us, and thank you for watching, and good night.
This program was produced by WNED-TV, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding was provided by public television stations. Additional support was provided by unrestricted general program grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ford Foundation, and by a grant from the Baird Foundation.